Florida man accused of doing something crazy is not the most surprising headline, but the details are really kind of interesting here. I'm joined by Noah Lanard, whose reporting has helped uncover some of the more bizarre parts of Congressman Cory Mills' background as he seeks re-election in Florida's 7th congressional district with the endorsement of another Florida man, technically, in President Donald Trump. Noah, thanks for making the time. I want to start with Cory Mills and who he is, and then get to what you found out in your reporting. So maybe start us out by telling us who this person is.
Cory Mills is a Florida congressman. He represents a district in Central Florida. He was first elected in 2022, and actually there wasn't much scandal about him initially, but it is really since last year that he has emerged as one of Congress's most scandal-plagued members of Congress. He had a restraining order placed on him by an ex-girlfriend, by a Florida judge last year. There's been very credible accusations of stolen valor related to him obtaining a Bronze Star. Businesses that he started before entering Congress are now in shambles. It really is a long list. It's almost as if, George Santos were elected to Congress, but only got discovered as George Santos 2 or 3 years after the fact.
So, Noah, it's been reported that Congressman Mills was involved romantically with someone who was just a year out of high school, 19 or 20 years old. And as I understand it, Noah, you've been texting the congressman about this, asking him for details and to confirm this. What have you been talking about with Congressman Mills through text message?
Yeah, so I reached out to comment to Congressman Mills on Friday and asked him about this. And it was a pretty basic question. And it was, do you dispute that you dated a 19-year-old in 2023? Because according to public records, this person would have been either 19 or 20 years old at the time and working in Republican politics. And Mills' response was revealing. It was a long one, and I'll actually just pull it up here. It was not a denial. So skipping ahead, it says, "There's nothing illegal about two consenting adults dating. The obsession over a man's dating life is absurd, disturbing at best. Whether in office or as a private citizen, adults are entitled to date in their attempt to find their person. Sometimes you get lucky and find that immediately, but many are not so blessed." Fair enough. However, the details here, this would have been a man who was a member of Congress in his early 40s, potentially dating a 19-year-old who didn't work directly for him, but worked in the same field. And that individual has confided to associates, according to reporting from Roger Sullenberger, that the relationship felt exploitative. And then further, this is part of a pattern of Mills dating young women in their 20s while a member of Congress.
Can you say more about that? There are certainly some claims of misconduct and maybe even mistreatment of women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think by far the most straightforward, because it has gone to court and has been adjudicated by a judge in Florida, is led to a restraining order being placed on Cory Mills in October. And that restraining order expired earlier this year. And that related to his relationship with a woman named Lindsay Langston, who Mills was in a long-term relationship with. They shared a Florida home. That relationship ended because Mills was cheating on her with a different woman in her 20s. And that woman ended up calling 911 to report Mills for domestic abuse. She later recanted that accusation, but Mills was nearly arrested in that incident. And it was through news reports of this alleged domestic disturbance that Lindsay Langston learned that her partner, Cory Mills, was cheating on her. Now the relationship ends, and Mills ends up going on to threaten to release sexually explicit videos that were recorded during their relationship and harassing her. She asked him repeatedly to stop contacting her more than 10 times and ends up filing for a restraining order. They go to court. They both spent a long time on the stand, cross-examination. It was a very real court proceeding, and a Florida judge found against Cory Mills and granted a restraining order against him, and notably found that a key part of his testimony had not been quote-unquote truthful.
And what was that key part?
So this related to explicit videos recorded during the relationship. And Mills said this under oath, testifying I've watched the video of the hearings. Does not sound credible to me. It did not sound credible to the judge, and it certainly was not the truth, according to Lindsay Langston. So just reading some of these text messages referring to a potential future partner, it says, "I can send him a few videos of you as well. Oh, I still have them." Another text message 1 week later, "Thanks again for the videos." Cory Mills claimed that the video in question was a video of Lindsay Langston baking in their home kitchen in an apron, a very wholesome video that Mills wanted to share with a future partner to show how close the two of them had been. A judge did not find that to be a credible explanation. And this was one of a number of times in the hearing that Mills' credibility was challenged. The most explicit was Mills just said flat out, I am not in divorce proceedings. No divorce paperwork has been filed in relationship to yet another woman who he was married to but separated from at the time. The problem for Mills, as I've reported, is that Lindsay Langston's attorney was holding his divorce paperwork in his hand and then proceeded to hand that to the judge, his lawyer, and Mills himself, which seemed to catch Mills very off guard that he had been caught in that apparent lie.
I'm really actually trying not to laugh at how almost ridiculous some of this is, right? Like it feels as though there's something really almost cartoonish about the nature of all of this. But of course, something that's not very funny to many people would be Congressman Mills, the claims against him that he's kind of operating under stolen valor and laying claim to heroism that doesn't belong to him. As I understand it, Noah, you've been talking to people in his life specifically to get details around his military service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in total, I've talked to close to 20 people who've known him from his youth to the present day. Many of those are people who worked with him either while he served in the Army or afterwards while he was a military contractor in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those claims break down basically into two buckets. One is I've talked to many individuals who have told me that Mills repeatedly claimed to have been an Army Ranger. That's, an elite part of the Army. There is nothing to support that in Mills' Army records, which have now been released in response to Freedom of Information Act requests by the Army. So that's one thing. It's kind of saying basically you're special forces or close to it, but you're not. Much more serious is that Mills was awarded a Bronze Star under very unclear circumstances. So he was awarded a Bronze Star fairly recently, and it was more than 2 decades after the events in question. So what it comes down to is 2 battles in 2003. Mills was in Iraq in 2003 as a medic. And during one of those battles, and this is one of the first battles of the Iraq War, Mills claims to have saved the lives of 2 men, Alan Babin and Joe Hite. Now, the problem is that I spoke with Joe Hite, as other reporters have, and Joe Hite says that Cory Mills not only did not save his life was never in jeopardy during the battle, or he never sustained a life-threatening injury, and that he didn't recognize Mills until he looked up a photo of the congressman when being contacted and learning that Mills had claimed to save his life. The second person in the battle, and this is really dark, is Alan Babin. He was grievously wounded in this battle. It was actually when Hite was hit, Alan Babin, the platoon's medic, rushes up to provide aid to him, and he is struck by a bullet. He has ended up having dozens of surgeries, debilitating lifelong injuries, and he has no memory of the battle. So that means that in this battle, Cory Mills is the only person who is alleged to have witnessed his own heroic conduct. Now, skipping to a second battle, totally different battle. This is even more extreme. Mills claims this is a form submitted to nominate him for the Bronze Star. Claims that Mills bounded forward under, quote, murderous enemy fire, and then he subdued an insurgent who had grabbed Sergeant First Class Joe Farad. So this is, like stuff out of an action movie. Murderous enemy fire, hand-to-hand combat potentially, saving the life of a fellow soldier. Problem is that Joe Farad wrote a statement in which he solemnly swears that nothing of this ever happened. It is false and a fabrication, quote. So just didn't happen at all. This is 2 separate battles, 3 separate men who Mills has claimed to save the lives of, and 1 through tragic injury has no memory of it, and 2 say it definitely did not happen.
So when you've been texting Congressman Mills, has he mentioned anything about the Bronze Star that's in question now?
Yeah, so I asked him about this yesterday, and I actually asked him about it 3 different times. And one of the things I asked him about was, do you still stand by your claim that you saved the life of Joe Farad in heroic terms, even though he has said that this is false and a fabrication? It was really revealing. It was very Millsian in how he responded. I asked the question to him 3 times, and each time he provided a non-responsive answer that didn't get in. And one of them actually, what he did instead was he sent me a form that basically confirms that he did get a Bronze Star. So you can make of that what you will.
I want to zoom out a little bit. As I've said, this is a bit cartoonish. How are Republicans responding to this? I mean, is Cory Mills feeling the heat around this at all? Has he been stripped of committee assignments for some of these fabrications? What's happening in the GOP world for him?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned committee assignments, because this is a particularly important part of the story too, which is a little more serious and less cartoonish, is that Cory Mills' business, primarily before he entered Congress, was international arms dealer. His business did a number of things, but the bulk of the revenue, according to court records, came from selling high explosive grenades to foreign governments. Now, as a member of Congress, Cory Mills sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee and Armed Services Committee. And so these are committees that directly deal with, he claims these businesses are now in a blind trust. A lot of questions about that as well. But, that deal with his former business. He's taken a number of trips to Syria recently. His former business has a lot to do with his current committee assignments. Whether or not that's led to anything inappropriate is a different question. Now, Republicans kind of stuck by him for a while. While I was reporting on Mills, a lot of these had been out there. I wrote a long profile on them in February, and right before that profile came out, Donald Trump gave him a complete and total endorsement. Now, however, in the final days of the campaign, it does seem like things may be catching up with him. He has a credible challenger in Ryan Elijah, who's a former local news host. And Ron DeSantis pointedly on Friday said he is not supporting Cory Mills. So it's possible that Cory Mills' time will be up tomorrow. We don't know, but what's worth saying is that Donald Trump endorsed him at a period in which almost all of this was known, gave him the complete and total endorsement anyway. And it really is only in the last couple of weeks when it looks like he might be defeated despite that there's been some distancing being done.
And can you talk a little bit about those outside of, say, the electeds, maybe more the donor class? Like how's it looking for him from a financials perspective? We know that elections are often won by the people raising the most money. And so how's that looking for Cory Mills?
Yeah, I mean, Cory Mills' fundraising since these scandals have broken really because they really began at the very beginning of his second term in Congress in 2025. Just about a month into that term is when one of his girlfriends called 911 in Washington, D.C. to report the alleged domestic assault that was later recanted. So this whole term has been a mess for him, to put it mildly. And his fundraising recently has been abysmal. I mean, he raised only about $15,000 or $20,000 last month. And for a sitting member of Congress in a tough primary, that is horrible. And it's also worth noting who his largest donor appears to have been in that period, and that is former Congressman Matt Gaetz, another individual who is attracted the attention of the House Ethics Committee related to conduct involving young women. In Gaetz's case, potentially minors, or there are allegations of that. Mills has not been accused of that. However, when that's your largest donor of late, that's another red flag.
Noah, thank you so much for your diligence in reporting for Mother Jones. This has been really, really helpful ahead of this primary. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Garrison.